Here is a strange fact about the money in your pocket. It is not backed by gold. It is not backed by silver. It is not backed by anything you could ever hold in your hand. And yet a single one of these, the US dollar, quietly sits underneath almost every price on earth. A currency backed by nothing became the foundation of everything. How? Not by accident, by 3 moves, on a board the size of the planet. A hotel in the mountains, in 1944, where the most famous economist alive lost a duel he was supposed to win. A Sunday night in 1971, when one president went on television and turned every banknote in the world into paper backed by nothing but a promise. And a handshake over oil that locked it all in place. This is the story of how one nation's money became the whole world's. And it starts with a question that sounds impossible. If nothing is behind the dollar, what is holding it up? Stay with me. The answer is the most valuable secret in modern economics. This is how the dollar conquered the world. Stories like this one are what this channel is for, one a week, every week. Subscribe now, and let's get into it. Our first move is made in a place that could not look less like the center of the world, a grand old resort hotel in the New Hampshire mountains, in July of 1944. The war was still being fought, but the Allies knew they would win, and they had a bigger problem waiting past victory. The last time the money system broke down, in the 1930s, it had helped drag the world into depression and war. So 730 delegates, from 44 nations, came to Bretton Woods to design the money of the future. It came down to a duel between 2 men. On one side, John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist on earth, the British delegate, a legend in the room. He wanted something radical, a brand new world currency he called Bancor, run by a global institution that would discipline the winners of trade as well as the losers. On the other side, a quieter, sharper American, Dexter White, an assistant at the U.S. Treasury. His plan put the dollar at the center of everything, with the burden falling on countries that ran deficits, not the United States. And here's the thing about a negotiation. It doesn't matter how brilliant your idea is if the other side holds all the chips. In 1944, America held the chips, the factories, the armies, the gold. So Keynes gave the speeches. But White wrote the rules, and his plan won almost completely. The system White built was elegant. Gold sat at the bottom, unmovable. The dollar was chained to it at a fixed price, $35 for 1 ounce of gold, a rate America promised to honor forever. And every other currency, the pound, the franc, the yen, was pinned to the dollar. The dollar became the sun every other money orbited. To hold dollars was, in effect, to hold gold. They even built 2 institutions in that hotel to run it, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Both still shape the world today. But there's a ghost in this story. The man who dominated that conference, Dexter White, the architect of the dollar's throne, was, it would later emerge, under suspicion of spying for the Soviet Union. Accused before Congress in 1948, he died of a heart attack 3 days after testifying. Years afterward, decrypted Soviet cables, the famous Venona intercepts, put his name among their contacts. Historians still argue how far it went, traitor or naive true believer. But sit with the strangeness of it. The financial order that still runs your life was drafted, in large part, by a man the FBI would spend years investigating as an enemy agent. For a while, it worked like a dream. As Europe and Japan rebuilt, the world was desperate for dollars, and only America could print them. A French finance minister, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, gave that power its perfect, bitter name, America's exorbitant privilege, the ability to spend more than you earn, forever, simply because the whole world needs to hold your money. But a privilege that good always comes with a hidden bill, and it was already coming due. Here's the problem with that number, $35 an ounce, the promise the whole system stood on. Every dollar in the world was really a little paper receipt, a claim that said, bring me back to America, and I'll give you gold, at 35 an ounce. That promise held only as long as the world never tried to cash all the receipts at once. And the system's own success guaranteed that one day, it would. In 1960, a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin explained the trap to the U.S. Congress. So clearly we now just call it the Triffin dilemma. For the dollar to be the world's money, America had to supply the world with dollars, sending more out than it took back in, year after year. Otherwise, global trade would choke. But every dollar that went out was one more claim on the same fixed pile of gold in Fort Knox. The more the world used the dollar, the more dollars piled up abroad, and the less believable that $35 promise became. America had to flood the world with dollars to keep the system alive, and flooding the world with dollars was exactly what would kill it. There was no way to do both. So picture 2 lines on a chart. One is America's gold, almost flat. The other is the number of dollars held outside the United States, climbing and climbing. Somewhere at the end of the 1950s, those 2 lines cross. From that moment, there were simply more dollars in the world than gold to redeem them. The promise wasn't just strained, it was, quietly, already broken. By the 1960s, foreign central banks, France in the lead, began handing back dollars and walking away with America's gold. The vault was emptying. And a promise you can't keep is only a promise until someone calls it. Which brings us to the second move, and it lands on a single Sunday night. By the summer of 1971, the game was up. There was nowhere near enough gold left to cover the dollars pointed at it. So President Richard Nixon gathered his closest economic advisors, his Treasury Secretary, his Fed chairman, a young official named Paul Volcker, and vanished, in secret, to Camp David for the weekend. When they came down, they had made one of the most consequential decisions in the history of money. On the evening of August 15, 1971, a Sunday, chosen deliberately, while the markets were closed, Nixon went on national television. And buried in the announcement came the sentence that changed everything. The United States would suspend, temporarily, the conversion of the dollar into gold. Temporarily. That word was doing an enormous amount of work, because it never came back. In that moment, the chain forged at Bretton Woods snapped. The dollar was no longer a receipt for gold. It was no longer a receipt for anything. And since every other currency was tied to the dollar, they all came loose at once. This is the quiet earthquake at the center of our story. Before that Sunday night, money everywhere on earth was, in the end, a claim on metal. After it, every bill in every wallet became fiat money, worth something for one reason only, because a government says so, and everyone agrees to believe it. We've lived in that world every single day since. Most of us have never known any other. And it began on a Sunday night, interrupting a Western. By every rule of logic, that should have been the end of the dollar's reign. Its one great advantage, being as good as gold, was gone. So here's the paradox this whole episode has been building toward. The dollar didn't fall. It got stronger. And the third move is how. In the early 1970s, oil prices exploded, and staggering rivers of money flooded into the countries that sold it. Above all, Saudi Arabia. Oil was already bought and sold in dollars, simply because the dollar was already the language of global trade. But that created a beautiful loop. The oil states earned oceans of dollars, far more than they could spend. So where did the money go? Straight back into America, into U.S. government bonds, into American banks. Economists named it petrodollar recycling. Between 1974 and 1981 alone, the oil-exporting nations ran a combined surplus of around $450 billion, much of it flowing back into dollar assets. In 1974, the United States and Saudi Arabia set up a formal commission to bind their economies together. Think about what that did. Everyone who needed oil, which is everyone, first needed dollars to buy it. And everyone who sold oil lent those dollars right back to America. The dollar had lost its anchor in gold and, almost overnight, found a new one in the most important commodity on earth. It didn't need the metal anymore. The world's bottomless demand for dollars had become its own kind of backing. A currency tied to nothing had quietly tied itself to everything. Strip away the gold, and the dollar reveals a pattern you'll see again and again on this channel. And it answers the question we opened with. What holds up the dollar isn't metal. It never really was. It's the same fragile, powerful thing that held up every story we've told. Trust, and the weight of a whole world already using it. The genius wasn't finding something to put behind the money. It was making the money the thing everything else stands on. The hotel wrote the rules, the Sunday cut the anchor, the oil made it impossible to leave. Once the whole planet keeps its savings, prices its goods, and settles its debts in your currency, you don't need gold behind it. The network is the backing. Money, in the end, is a story a nation tells the world, and the dollar is simply the story the most people, in the most places, still agree to believe. Today, roughly 6 in 10 of the reserves held by the world's central banks are still in dollars, and most of the planet's oil is still priced in them. A currency backed by nothing, holding up almost everything. Still, that's the strange power of belief in money. But belief has a dark twin. The moment a crowd believes something that isn't true at all and pays for it. Next time on Paper Empires, we meet a man so brilliant he mapped the motion of the planets and still lost a fortune chasing a stock everyone swore could only rise. That's the story of Isaac Newton and the South Sea Bubble, the scam that fooled the smartest man alive. And it's next. This is Paper Empires, the wildest true stories of money, markets, and the economies that shaped our world. If this is your kind of history, subscribe. The next story is already on the way.